introduce my friend, Art Kooyman.
Yes, nothing did.
So, Art, what does come first, the chicken or the egg?
I'm still working on that one, yeah.
Just one down, right down.
Good morning. Great worship, guys. Yeah, it's hard to follow that, isn't it? I wrote down, I'm not the best speaker, so bear with me, guys.
Okay.
I wrote down a few things. I'm going to tell you my story, how God is always watching over us and leads us through our lives. And hopefully this will inspire and enlighten us and to do better for the Lord. I was born as a very small child in the Netherlands. And my family came to this country in 1949. I was born during the World War II, and that's a whole other story right there that I could tell, but don't have enough time. Grew up in a Christian family, and one of my fondest memories of growing up was every Sunday evening, because my dad was a very hard worker and worked 7 days a week mostly, except for Sundays, 6 days a week. And we would study the Bible after Sunday meal. And that's where I got a lot of my inspiration from the Bible and my basic training from my dad and my family that way. We would sit around, read a couple chapters and discuss it. My desire to work with children came when I was around 10, when I went to a children's camp for the first time. And I accepted Jesus as my Savior right then and there for the first time. As years went by, I guess I could say I was more Christ conscious as a young man and as I was growing up, but really didn't commit fully. I was married for the first time at age 21 to my high school sweetheart. We met in a church. After about 5 years, we drifted apart and Christ was not in our lives. We got a divorce. About 2 years later, I met the love of my life at a church. Actually, we met on a blind date at a Jewish wedding. So, and they said it wouldn't work, but it did. 44 years later, we're still together.
Amen.
Yeah. Praise God for that. And a couple years after we married, took us about 4 years. We tried to have kids. Wasn't working too well, but we finally had a daughter. Her name was Gina. And that's a big change in our lives started then when we had our first child. We lived not far from a little church that had a preschool. And we sent our daughter when she was about 3 for a couple days a week to this preschool. She kept coming home every day asking me about Jesus. And so I have to answer these questions. And one day I was sitting alone in my room, pondering what she has been asking me and wondering what I should do. And all of a sudden I heard a voice. You know, I used to hear people say, you know, I heard God told me this and this. Well, I always thought they were a little bit, okay, fine. But God really, I heard something. There was nobody, you know, I heard, I want you back. You know, you look around and there's nobody there. But he definitely said to me, I want you back. I went to my wife and we talked about it and she says, you know, I've been feeling the same sort of stirrings. She came from a good Catholic family, but she said there was never no personal relationship, which she was lacking. So the next Sunday, we went as a family to church, and we both felt really stirred, and something was changing in our lives. And that week, both the pastors for the church came over to visit us, and we sat down and we prayed and we committed our lives back to Christ. And it was wonderful. Now the next part of my journey, wait a minute, I'm ahead of myself. Yes. A couple of weeks ago, we had a speaker here. I can't remember his name, but he talked about discipleship. Rodney, right. And everything he said was so important, and I believe in it so strongly, because after we committed our lives to Christ, we started a year program of discipleship. Every Wednesday evening, we spent 2 hours in discipleship. And that's when we really came close to the Lord and felt his real calling, and started our relationship and our walk with him. And at that time, our business, which somebody mentioned, we had a chicken ranch. We had 80,000 chickens, which isn't that many anymore, but it was a family ranch, and it was ending. Things were changing, so it was ending. And I took a job for a slaughterhouse, which I bought these chickens for slaughter. And part of my duties was to drive all over Southern California and some Northern California and Utah, visiting different ranches to buy these chickens. And the company gave me a vehicle, which was an old Caltrans vehicle, which didn't have a radio or air conditioning, and it was a real beater. But it was good for me at that time, because I was able to drive for hours and contemplate what I've been learning and what I've been reading in the Bible, and be able to pray. And one of our lessons at that time was on being filled with the Spirit. And this is, it feels, I can picture it like it happened yesterday. I was driving down to Ramona on a long stretch of road, with nothing around, and just thinking and asking God, what should I do? What is this being filled with the Spirit? Lots of us know it in different terms, but all of a sudden he came upon me. And I must have drove for hours and hours, seems like it, but I felt like I was floating in the presence of God. And ever since, and that was the turning point where I really fully committed and never left since then. And my wife followed that shortly afterwards, because we talked about it. We were very close always in that sort of endeavor. So if you get a chance to do discipleship or be able to disciple someone, don't hesitate, because it's so important. And I think that's part of our calling, is to be disciples for everyone else. But the job I had there was quite interesting. After being in a chicken ranch for almost 22 years, the only people I talked to were chickens, basically. And they really didn't have a whole lot to say. So I took this job at the slaughterhouse, which at the time I call it the job from hell, because it was a lot of work, which I spent I would start 4 in the morning, drive to San Diego to pick up chickens or rabbits, and get home 3 or 4 at 7 o'clock at night. So it was a lot of, but I learned how to talk to people and to other things than chickens. And it was the next stepping stone in my life. Because, and after that, after working there, I only worked there for a couple of years, but it changed a lot of things. And as I went to work as an outside salesman after that for a company called Zepp Manufacturing. And I worked for them for nearly 30 years. But that was a great job because it gave me a lot of freedom. I was this outside sales rep, like I said, and I worked as commission only. So every morning when I woke up, I told everybody I was unemployed until I made my first sale. So, but that gave me a lot of freedom to do other things, because I was pretty much my own boss. I could delegate my time, and so my wife and I got involved in ministries. And one of the first ministry I got involved was teaching junior high Sunday school. Our youth pastor came to me and asked if I wanted to do it, and I said, well, let me talk it over with my wife. And we talked it over and we prayed, and she says, I think we need to do this together. So ever since then, we've been ministry partners together. Everything we've done, it's always been as a couple. And we did that for 6 years and realized teaching junior high is like a Protestant form of purgatory.
Yeah.
So if you ever done anything like that, you'll understand. But it was good. And we did that for 6 years. And at the end of the 6-year period, we were contemplating going into children's ministries because we felt like we really weren't touching the kids or whatever. And one day we were on a vacation in San Diego, and just as we were changing over, and when we were on vacation, we like to visit other churches, and we visited a church in on the campus of Nazarene College there. Point Loma, exactly. That's where my daughter went. And we sat next to this young couple that went to school there. And we've been talking about, did we do any good teaching junior high? And God, did we lead people correctly? And this is how God works sometimes. Because right next to the couple we were sitting, she came over, she said, I know you two. You were my Sunday school teachers. And you guys meant so much to us at a time that our family was going through a tough time. And everything you said was great for us. And we learned so much. And we just said, thank you, Lord. Thank you for giving, not beating my chest that we did good, but God gave us that little insight saying, you are doing it. Keep doing it. So that was such a blessing for us. So right after that, the children's ministries we went into were two different things. We went into our denomination at the time had a Christian scouting program called Caravan. And we started teaching in that. And it was a scouting group for boys and girls from first grade to sixth grade. And it met ours met on every Wednesday evening and during the school season. And we started in that, and little by little we went up. We became the directors in our church, and then they asked us to be the directors of the whole district of all the 50 churches. So, which was, with prayer and everything, we did that for 25 years. So, and it was very, very rewarding because it was you think, a scouting program, big deal. But it opened my eyes to a lot of things because in that ministry, we were able to touch families and bring families together. And we had so many stories where a father wasn't going to church or anything with the family. And because of this ministry, we were able to bring families into it because fathers would love doing these things. And all of a sudden, we got stories where they committed themselves back to the Lord, back to their families. And so it was really a great blessing for us to do all that. Then came another tough time in our lives. During the end of that period when we're getting ready to retire and move on, we were getting ready to move to Canyon Lake. I skipped the whole thing. Let me go back a little bit.
Yeah, we need it all.
Yeah.
That was quite the teaser there.
Yeah. Sorry, guys. Sorry. We also had a son 4 years after our daughter was born. And he was born prematurely. He was 3 months early. So he was just barely 2 pounds at the time. And thanks to a great church, a great pastor, we were able to get through a lot of that. He spent 3 months at Loma Linda. And through all that, we call that one of our worst times and our best times. Because during that time, I was working all those hours. And we'd visit him at Loma Linda every day. And God just carried us through that. There were times like we were just being held by his hands going through that tough period. And because of all what God has done for us, we were able to share with people in the NATO intensive care how God carries us through this, because it was full of babies like that. I think at that what time we were there were close to 30 infants that were born prematurely. So a lot of families struggling with what to do, and some weren't doing well, and so, but thank God we were able to minister to lots of people that way. So after actually 2 months of being there, he was doing well, they thought, and they sent him home with us. And he was still pretty small. He was only 4 pounds at the time. First day we got him home, my wife was nursing him. His heart stopped, and he stopped breathing. And at Loma Linda, before you can leave there, you have to pass a an infant CPR class. And so, as he was laying there on the floor and we were working on him, both my wife and I were sitting there saying, we couldn't have done this without God hovering over us and keeping us, because it's so, if you've ever been through a situation like it, it's unbelievably scary. And that was before 911. So my wife just that morning put the phone number on the phone for the emergency. So we called and the paramedics came in, and they didn't want to touch him. He was so small. They were so glad. We had to go with them to take him to the hospital, and he survived, obviously, but he spent another month at Loma Linda, and then he came home, and he was on a monitor for a whole year after that, but he wound up doing much better, even though it was a tough situation for a long time. So that's the story of our son, partially. I'm going to go a little bit more into his story now and part of his testimony. After when I started to tell you, after we were getting ready to retire and move down to Canyon Lake, where we were going to live with my daughter and son-in-law, they're living there also, he decided to move on his own. He didn't want to leave Alta Loma where we lived. And he had a very good job at the time, so things looking good. Okay, fine. He moved out into an apartment, was living, but little did we know that he was severely bipolar. He had we thought he had ADD for a long time, but misdiagnosed and this and that. And because of that situation, he lost his job after a while because of being bipolar. You're pretty much mentally ill to a certain degree. So lost his job, wound up being homeless, which we didn't know at the time. Lived in his truck and lived on Mount Baldy a lot. And because of this bipolarism, he committed a crime. And that was a tough period, very tough. He committed this crime, spent 4 years in prison, and his testimony starts then. Because on his way to jail the first time, he was in a bus, and the driver of the bus was playing, which is really strange, but it's got to be God, playing a sermon on his namesake, Timothy. He was playing a sermon on the book of Timothy. And right then and there, he said he committed his life back to Christ. And he told me later, says, Dad, this is what you've always been trying to tell me about, what this is about. And I realized that. Well, through this time in prison, he had some ups and downs, because he also was he was self-medicating his condition, so with the wrong medication, the wrong drugs, and so on. So, but finally, with much contact, he joined a Christian group there in church. Oops, sorry guys. Could be, he calls me an awful lot. So he spent, in a lot of Bible studies, and because of that, Paulette and I and another group at our church, another couple at our church, started a little prison ministries, calling Serving Time Prison Ministries, which we, through my son, were able to contact a lot of these people that were in his Bible study and prisoners that committed their lives back to Christ. So part of we sort of wrote them letters, and we kept in contact with them, and our purpose was to bring them in contact with their families again and help their transition of getting out, and keeping close to God. And as time went on, this ministry sort of ran its course, but we're still in contact with several of these guys and helping them through their situations. Little side story. Because of my son's bipolar and not being able to get the right medication, if you ever dealt with anybody with that, the biggest problem is finding the right medications and getting them on the right track. They were doing it in prison, giving medication, but most of them kept him pretty much catatonic, and he wasn't really progressing too well. And so my wife started fighting for him. And there was another couple in our church that knew some people in the state, and a lawyer or this and that. We kept contacting different people, and my wife went all the way up to the governor's office, contact people to get him to get the right medication, which we finally got him on the right medication, which he's still taking today and doing wonderful. One day, while he was in prison, the captain came up to him and I said to him, "Who is your mother anyway?" I keep getting all these phone calls from the governor's office about you. So he told us, "You don't mess with my mom." So now, if you knew my wife, she's only about 5'2", little tiny thing, 106 pounds right now. But she's a fighter. So he got out of prison 4 years later and spent another 4 years on parole, which was extremely difficult. Because of his crime, he had to live in San Diego away from us. He couldn't come up this way, and spent a lot of time in halfway houses. And during this time, you would think, he might slip back, but he didn't. He's been now, almost 10 years sober, and found a good church to go to. He's also an usher at his church and doing well. And so, and my son and I, growing up, were really never touched very close. He was, all the things I was interested in, or I tried to get him interested, he wasn't. Because of his disease. So, but after all this prison, we've become best friends. And he calls me too many times a day. And he's doing well. He couldn't get a job because of his crime for a long time, and I finally told him to join the union. I'm not a union guy, guys, so that was hard for me. But he joined a union, got a great job, was working every day, and he's still living in a rented room in a couple's home, but doing well, so that's great. Also, my daughter, just to add this, my daughter's doing good too. She's also in some ministry. She is the worship leader at her church in Arizona, in Lake Havasu. So I feel, part of our duties is to raise our kids in the way they should go. Amen. And, my son's a great example of that, of course, because we always went to church. He always went to Sunday school, went to children's camps and all that. And during that time, God pulled him back. So. Yes.
You knew where to go back to.
Yes. Also, part of our children's ministries was we did children's camps. We were asked to do, which we do one weekend a year during the summer. We go up and take a couple hundred kids with us and do children's camp for a week. And first I started off as a counselor, my wife as a counselor, and we worked our way up to Dean of Boys, and we actually ran the camps a couple of years later, and we retired from that also, but I still go out once a year, just one day, and I teach archery to children's camp. So I still keep my fingers in it and can't let go of everything. And I do the same for our camping group too. So even though we retire, we don't retire. We keep on going.
Amen.
Yes. It seems like God don't want you to quit. He wants you to keep doing something. And as long as I have energy, I'm going to do it. So as we move down here, we're now members of Lamb's Fellowship, a wonderful church for us, and it's just perfect for our family. And we are now the leaders of the Usher Greeter Ministry, and we actually helped start the VBS program at Lamb's quite a few years ago, and we're still involved in that. And so, as you can see, this is how God can lead you. Everybody's testimony is different. And I remember way back talking to a young lady, a good friend of ours that was single at the time, and we were at a church service and somebody was giving their testimony. It was one of these testimonies where, you know, at the bottom and then went all the way up with Jesus, but you know, all these bad things have happened. And she said to me, he said, you know, I can't give a testimony because my life has always been walking with the Lord ever since a little child. I said, well, that's a testimony right there, that you never drifted. And here now she's a grandmother and she's still walking with the Lord very strongly. So, you know, those are, you know, don't ever belittle what God has done in your life. And one of our life verses is, my family is, it comes out of Joshua. When Joshua was talking at the end of his ministry or life, he was talking to the children of Israel, and he says, choose today who you will serve. But for me and my family, we will serve the Lord. And that has become our thing. So I hope that's helped somebody. Okay. Thank you guys.